Hi, everybody. Good morning. I think this sounds like it's on, right? Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Full house. Please help yourself to all of the really cool goodies. Looks delicious. My name is Chrissy Houlahan, and I'm really proud to be here. I am one of the co-chairs of the UXO and Demining Caucus here in the House with my colleague, Representative David Valdeo, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first caucus event of this year. Today's event will highlight a key tool to improve our national security and to advance our foreign policy goals, and that tool is conventional weapons destruction. The U.S. has a really long history of leading the world in supporting that conventional weapons destruction and their programs, which have saved countless lives and helped millions of communities around the world recover from conflict. Through the implementation partners such as HALO and MAG, many of whom are here in this room today, the State Department Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement advances our U.S. interests through demining and weapons security programs in roughly 40 countries around the world. In these places, deminers who wear U.S. flags save lives, they promote American leadership, they strengthen bilateral relationships, and they ensure that countries can build critical infrastructure. We were having conversations on the side about the importance of things like this, the importance of soft power, the importance of the United States leading the way, and something like conventional weapons destruction programs are important tools in this soft power for our national security. They also deny cartels and terrorist organizations access to these explosive materials and weapons that could be possibly turned against the U.S. or against our allies as well. So demining programs also allow the U.S. to counter adversaries such as China and Russia too. As the conflict continues, unfortunately, in Ukraine, demining programs are getting farmers back on their land, strengthening Ukraine's economy, its war effort in the global food supply. And some of you know, but this is personal to me, my own father was born in Ukraine 84 years ago, a couple days ago. Conventional weapons destruction programs are effective and they are transformational foreign assistance programs. So for those of you in the audience who have a say in this, and all of us do because we all, presumably all have a vote on this, I urge you to join me in supporting conventional weapons destruction programs in the fiscal year 27 appropriations process, a request that I've been really proud to have helped lead in the last several years as well. I hope again to see a very bipartisan show of support for these programs. Thank you again all for being here. I also encourage you who are here who are not in the UXO Demining Caucus, perhaps you're part of a team that is not, to please do join us in support of these programs. They're really, really important to U.S. security. I will now turn things over to our moderator, Kristen, and to our wonderful speakers, Karen, Lucy, Sherry, and Rebecca, to enlighten us. I apologize, I have to leave for another briefing, also on security, national security, but it's a pleasure to be with you, and I wish you good fortune in this conversation.
In case anyone who's standing wants to have a seat, please feel free. So my name is Kristen Stevens. I'm the head of Congressional Affairs and Strategic Engagement for the HALO Trust in our U.S. office. And I want to thank the UXO Demining Caucus, particularly the co-chairs, Representatives Houlahan and Valdeo, for hosting this event. And thank you to our esteemed panelists from PeaceTrees Vietnam, HALO, MAG, and the State Department. And thank you all so much for being here today. To offer a bit of context going into this discussion, today, roughly 60 countries and territories around the world still contain mines and explosive hazards, threatening civilians and U.S. personnel stationed abroad. The most recent Landmine Monitor reported that in 2024, more than 6,200 people were killed or injured by landmines and other explosive remnants of war, which is the highest level since 2020. 90% were civilians, and nearly half of these were children. And as conflicts in the Middle East, Ukraine, Cambodia, and elsewhere continue to result in massive amounts of explosive contamination, global demining programs have never been more important. We are so incredibly grateful for the leadership of the State Department in ensuring that these explosives and unsecured weapons are addressed, and to Congress for ensuring funding for conventional weapons destruction programs. And we also appreciate the efforts of the Department of War Strategies for Low-Intensity Conflict Demining Program, formerly known as the Humanitarian Demining Research and Development Program, for partnering with organizations like HALO and MAG to advance demining technology, which makes demining as safe and efficient as possible while contributing to advancement in demining technology for the U.S. warfighter. As you'll hear today, removing explosive threats can be absolutely transformative for communities around the world, not just providing humanitarian relief, but also providing security, stability, and prosperity that directly benefits Americans, making demining a key foreign policy instrument. And with that, I am pleased to introduce the panelists today in speaking order, starting with Sherry Bryan, who is the Executive Director for Mines Advisory Group U.S. She directs all aspects of operations for MAG U.S., working from the DC headquarters. Previously, as Executive Vice President at the National Democratic Institute, she led a global nonprofit organization with 1,300 employees in 65 countries, working directly with foreign political leaders and civic partners on issues related to democracy, governance, electoral integrity, and conflict recovery. Sherry has decades of experience managing relationships with donor aid agencies, including the U.S. State Department, USAID, European governments, and multilateral organizations. Following Sherry will be Lucy Reeve, who serves as Regional Director for Africa for the HALO Trust. Lucy joined HALO in 2017 and completed demining operations training in Cambodia, Somaliland, Georgia, and Abkhazia. She was then posted to Afghanistan, Cambodia, and Libya, overseeing the delivery of projects in mine clearance, weapons and ammunition management, and IED clearance. In 2021, she became Chief of Staff and became Regional Director for HALO's Africa programs in 2025. Lucy will be followed by Rebecca Giovanazzi, I hope I'm pronouncing that, Giovanazzi, who has a decade of experience working in international development. She currently serves as PeaceTrees Vietnam's Congressional Liaison, advocating for demining programs in central Vietnam and strong U.S.-Vietnam relations. Prior to that, she collaborated with numerous national electoral commissions to improve electoral transparency, supported multi-stakeholder feedback mechanisms to improve government service delivery, and worked with formal and informal civil society organizations to advocate for locally identified priorities such as anti-corruption and disability rights. And last but absolutely not least, Karen Chandler, who serves as Director of the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs in the U.S. State Department, a position she has held since September 2021. Karen has nearly 2 decades of experience as a civil servant at the State Department and is a career member of the Senior Executive Service. Previously, she served as the Director of the Interagency MANPADS Task Force in the Political Military Affairs Bureau, and from 2015 to 2019, she was the PM Chief of Staff, where she was responsible for strategy coordination and operational management of the Bureau. This is an amazing panel of experts today, so looking forward to getting the discussion started. And just so you know, at the end of the program, hopefully we'll have some time for questions, so if you think you have some questions you might want to ask to any of our panelists today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sherry from Mines Advisory.
Thanks for all of you showing up today. Glad the snow stopped and the streets are a little clearer. My name is Sherry Bryan. As you know, I'm the Director of the Mines Advisory Group here in Washington. And I want to thank the Congresswoman for showing up this morning. I don't know if any of you worked with her, but we greatly appreciate that introduction. And of course, Representative Valdeo also, and I don't know if any of his staff are here, but all of you for coming. I'm going to speak a little bit about mine removal and our work at MAG in the Middle East as a specific region. And talk about why I think this is so important to the U.S. government and U.S. foreign policy interests. So across the Middle East, explosive remnants of war remain one of the most persistent drivers of civilian harm and instability. We've worked in the Middle East since 1992, and right now we work in Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank, and Jordan, and Syria, which I'll talk about in more detail in a minute. In Iraq, we continue to address contamination that has been around for many, many years as a result of the Iran-Iraq war, but also through ISIS insurgency. And in Lebanon, we're really working to resolve some of the issues that were related to the 2023-2024 hostilities that have really prevented a lot of Lebanese from returning safely to home. In Gaza, I know you've all heard a lot about the dense urban contamination that has been a result of the hostilities for the last 2 years. Across all of these contexts, landmines and unexploded ordnances do more than just injure and kill. They block humanitarian assistance. I know you've heard about that a lot in Gaza, where humanitarian assistance simply cannot get through because of the rubble and the debris. They delay recovery and reconstruction efforts and undermine livelihoods and prolong displacement. I like to say humanitarian mine action is not a niche activity. A lot of people think it's a very unique, standalone activity. I think it's really a foundational enabler. It's a prerequisite for safe returns, for economic recovery, infrastructure rehabilitation, and longer-term stability. And I think nowhere is more evident than what's happening in Syria today, if you are a Middle East follower or a Syria follower. MAG's mine action programming in Syria is not only life-saving, but I think it's really central to stability, recovery, and long-term U.S. national interest and security objectives. Since 2016, MAG has been working with U.S. funding to do demining programs in Syria focused on the northeast region, implemented both by our own staff and by Syria partner organizations. That's reflected the political reality in the country up until 2024, when the Assad regime fell, and that reality changed. We rapidly pivoted to what I would call a whole of Syria approach. So rather than just working in one section of the country, we're now working across the country, expanding our operations to newly accessible areas in the Northwest, the central regions, while maintaining our established programming in the Northeast. Last year, 2025, we conducted a needs assessment in Homs and Hama governance, as well as the newly liberated areas of southern Raqqa. The nationwide approach is essential for stability. There are a couple of reasons why. Demining is a very visible work. Communities can see where land is being cleared and where clearance is not being carried out. In other countries, in post-conflict environments, uneven mine action has fueled grievances and division, particularly along sectarian lines or political lines. In Syria's fragile transition, selective or fragmented clearance risks reinforcing exactly the tensions that extremists seek to exploit. So it's really important that mine action is carried out evenly across the country. Humanitarian mine action also plays an important role in confidence building. Clearance is widely perceived as a neutral, life-saving, locally beneficial action, making it one of the few forms of international engagement that can operate across political and geographic lines. The humanitarian urgency in Syria is really stark. The country is currently experiencing the highest number of unexploded ordnances injuries in the world. Since the regime fell, 938 explosive ordinances have been recorded, resulting in over 1,700 deaths, casualties. According to the UN, 65% of Syrians, or about 15 million people, are at risk, and contamination is actively blocking humanitarian access to 146 sub-districts in the country. American leadership, delivered through MAG and our other partners like the Halo Trust and others, matters very much in these coming years. I think there's 3 reasons why this is important to the U.S. First, U.S. support enables the removal simply of active sources of danger, unexploded ordnances and weapons that continue to kill, restrict movement, and destabilize communities long after the fighting is stopped. Second, the support that the U.S. gives helps build Syrian capacity, not dependency. MAG right now trains Syrian deminers, supervisors, and managers in survey, clearance, quality assurance, and explosive ordnance risk education. helping Syrians to manage contamination risks themselves as national institutions reemerge in the country. We've been working closely with the Mine Action Center in Northeast Syria since 2022 to strengthen coordination, standardization, and technical capacity within the organization. So I think that's an important message for all of us to take back, that these are not programs that we seek to continue indefinitely in the future, but that we really hope we can build a capacity of the local organizations to carry on this work. The third aspect that's important to American interests is that clearance work enables economic recovery and private sector investment. So until contaminated lands are cleared, farmers can't farm, food production cannot recover, and private investment from abroad in the region that is seeking to build infrastructure, roads, power, and water systems simply cannot happen. MAG's results from last year alone demonstrate why this investment delivers. Last year, we reached more than 51,000 Syrians directly with life-saving risk education, helping them understand how to avoid UXOs, unexploded ordinances. We also reached an additional 4 million people through national television campaigns. And we were able to clear and release 5 million square meters of land, benefiting over 8,000 people. And we safely removed and destroyed over 2,500 explosive ordinances. While American leadership is critical, the U.S. is not acting alone. Other governments are helping in this effort. MAG's work in Syria is supported by the governments of the Netherlands, Norway, and Canada. So this is an effort by Western democracies that are central to supporting change and reform in Syria. Humanitarian mine action delivered by experienced partners like MAG and our friends at HALO is one of the most cost-effective tools available to support stabilization, prevent renewed conflict, support counterterrorism, and reduce the likelihood of far more costly interventions in the future. This work advances U.S. strategic goals. It advances stability, partner capacity, and prevention, and it delivers measurable, durable results that reduce long-term humanitarian and security costs. Sustained American leadership of landmine and UXO removal, implemented through trusted partners like MAG, is not only a humanitarian imperative, it's a strategic investment in regional stability and in national security. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I would like to say a huge thank you to the caucus, to the U.S. State Department, to the Department of War, and to Congress for hosting us today. And on a personal level, I'd just like to say how deeply honored I am to have the opportunity to speak here today. So I'm just going to introduce you to the HALO Trust quickly. We are one of the world's largest humanitarian demining organizations. And as Kristen and Sherry have articulated so well, our work is to clear landmines and unexploded ordnance from conflict zones, which saves lives, restores livelihoods, rebuilds communities, and paves the way for economic growth. The presence of landmines strangles economic recovery once conflict is over, and it blocks the delivery of all other types of humanitarian assistance during conflict. I'm the Regional Director for Africa, which means I oversee the safe and efficient delivery of our programs in Angola, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, and Somaliland. And we also host weapons security projects in coastal West Africa, Mozambique, and Libya. In Africa, we're grateful recipients of US government support for decades. And that has solidified the US's reputation as a peacemaker and an economic powerhouse in Africa, but also around the world in this truly bipartisan effort. Africa is home to some of HALO's flagship programs where we deploy at scale. It's also home to some of the most dangerous and desperate countries in the world where we work. An example is in Sudan, where our work is saving lives, restoring homes and livelihoods, and building resilience in communities, that all helps to mitigate the risks of this proxy war spilling over its borders and leading to wider regional instability. In this way, HALO's work is a preemptive action to prevent wider conflict deflagration that might threaten US interests in the Middle East and could require a US response in the future. We also work in Somalia and Somaliland, where we've worked for decades with US government support. Stable and resilient communities in the Horn of Africa reduce the risk posed to critical shipping routes in the Gulf of Aden, which are absolutely vital to ensure the flow of global trade. US military assets in Djibouti are safer if the Horn of Africa is stable and free from explosive ordnance that not only destabilizes communities, but provides insurgent groups the opportunity to harvest explosives to make improvised weaponry. Private companies are also increasingly benefiting from the relative stability in places like Somaliland, and they're investing in trade corridor infrastructure, which is underpinned by HALO's clearance. I was in Somaliland in November and talked to some beneficiary communities who live alongside a road that connects the port of Berbera with Somaliland's capital, Hargeisa. As the road was being dug, diggers were hitting anti-tank mines. But now, thanks to HALO's clearance, trade infrastructure can continue to be built and offers an opportunity for prosperity like never before in Somaliland. In a more hopeful turn, I will spotlight HALO's program in Angola, where we've been working for decades to clear landmines in close collaboration with our friends at AG. And you can see a map here that outlines some of the work that we're doing in Angola. Not only does our work there save many people from death and injury, including children who have to walk through minefields just to get to school, but it also makes land safe for critical minerals extraction to take place along the Lobito Corridor, which is a road and rail belt that you can see on this map that connects mineral-rich Zambia and DRC with the port of Lobito on the west coast of Angola. The government of Angola is the first country in the world to fund clearance in its own country, having previously committed $60 million, and we are due to receive a commitment from them for another $30 million imminently. HALO's demining work in Angola in this way supports the US government to build a strategic partnership with the government of Angola that will ensure US access to these critical minerals, which are essential for historic US industries like steel production and emerging new ones like hydrogen technologies. Now, whilst it's not in my region, I'd also like to take a chance to spotlight Cambodia, where landmines are a key element of the recent conflict with Thailand. Cambodia is where I learned to be a deminer, and I will tell you the two things that learning to be a deminer taught me: resilience and trust. So when I talk about resilience, yes, of course, I'm talking about the resilience needed to do a full day of demining in heavy safety gear, in the hot sun, and then you go home at the end of the day and wash your clothes in a bucket by a river and you cook your own dinner over a fire stove. But I'm also talking about the resilience of communities to rebuild after generations were wiped out in their civil war. I'm talking about the resilience to have hope for a better future. And thanks to President Trump's peacemaking efforts in Cambodia recently and the historic US commitment to demining Cambodia, hope for a more stable and prosperous future is achievable. Learning to be a deminer also taught me about trust building. And when I was given my first 2 square meters of contaminated land to clear with my own hands, I realized that when I cleared that land, I was asking my colleagues to trust me, that I had done my job correctly. They could walk on the land that I cleared and clear the next 2 square meters, and the next 2, and so on. And then when the job is done, the communities trust us that we've done the job correctly, and they can fully rebuild their lives. That trust is so powerful that I even invited my mum to come visit me in Cambodia, and she walked on land that I cleared, but my colleagues also cleared, without a single word of common language, but this powerful connection and trust. It is my hope that you'll all get the chance to see deminers in Cambodia, and you're all very welcome to visit us, because it's a really powerful sight to see these people proudly wearing US flags on their protective gear, deploying in their communities to clear landmines. They're acting as trust builders and peace advocates to clear mines and be change makers in fragile parts of the world that offer mutual prosperity for all of us. So the Cambodia example, but also the Africa programs that I mentioned, we see examples of how demining can open up space for trade and alignment with US foreign policy and national security objectives. I myself have seen a workforce at scale put down their weapons after war and pick up metal detectors instead to join the demining effort. They rebuild their communities with dignity and pride, and that allows them to prosper where they are, where they want to be, without the risk of being displaced. Once the land is cleared, the extensive infrastructure that's needed to extract and process and store and transport critical minerals can be built. Whilst the mines remain, it cannot. This is true for all other types of humanitarian aid that simply cannot reach communities until the way in is made safe. The strategic partnerships that develop as a result of demining programs ensure reliable access to critical minerals once the mines are cleared. In addition, HALO has an impressive and growing portfolio of private donors, including John Deere and Cargill, that join our donor governments in supporting our work. And in this way, HALO can be a convener of change makers across the world that can deliver sustainable and de-risked interventions. So, why does this matter? And why does this matter now? The IMF is currently forecasting that Africa's GDPs will outstrip Asia soon, and economic powerhouses like South Africa and Nigeria are becoming increasingly reliable trading partners. And the US government, as the largest and most historic supporter of demining globally, stands to benefit from the economic opportunities that fall out of demining. Moreover, in my region, Africa, we still see a coddling of rogue regimes like Iran, Russia, China. So now is the moment to double down on this effort and lay the foundations for long-term economic partnerships, an economic statecraft, if you will, that is realized through demining programs. Stable and prosperous communities in Africa and beyond, achieved by demining, reduce the need for other kinds of foreign assistance from the US. This not only makes America more prosperous, but will also address the immediate humanitarian needs of some of the world's most in need. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rebecca Janowski. I work for PeaceTrees Vietnam. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I've met with some of you before, so I'm glad you came. I want to start off by thanking the caucus co-chairs, Congress, and everyone for coming today. So you might be wondering what PeaceTrees is doing here. We're not a large demining organization, but we are a uniquely American organization. We were founded on Bainbridge Island in Washington State by a Gold Star family in 1995. By a family who lost their son during the Vietnam War 15 days into his deployment, and they sought to provide a pathway for reconciliation between U.S. and Vietnam veterans. We have worked over the past 30 years to provide humanitarian mine action to Central Vietnam, so the area of Vietnam where the former DMZ runs through, so Quang Tri and Quang Binh province. We have 300 local deminers trained to UN standards, and most of them have a very deep personal connection to the work. Some of them have lost family members to UXOs, some of them themselves have been involved in the accidents. They all have a very personal connection to our own work. And we work closely with the Vietnamese government to ensure not only smooth operations of demining efforts, but that all of our post-clearance development efforts, so building kindergartens, agricultural programs, scholarships, are in line with community needs. Over 80% of our own budget comes directly from states PMWRA. The remaining amount of our funding comes directly from U.S. citizens, veterans, their families, individuals, but most of that funding is earmarked by those individuals for post-clearance projects, not demining. It's estimated that over 8 million tons of ordnance and bombs were dropped in Vietnam during the U.S.-Vietnam War. An estimated 10 to 30% of all ordnance that was dropped, depending on the type of munition, failed to detonate on impact and remains in the ground today. Today we have cleared over 40 million square meters. We have destroyed over 155,000 type munitions and provided mine risk education to over 225,000 individuals. Our mine action efforts advance U.S. national security interests, American citizens' interests, and American business interests on a daily basis. We advance America's commitment to transparency and trustworthiness with our allies. We build strong relationships with provincial officials, the Department of Foreign Affairs, and the Vietnamese Union of Friendship Organizations over the past 30 years. We're often considered one of the first U.S. organizations to have began operations in Vietnam after the normalization of relations with Vietnam. We began in 1995, probably a month or two after the normalization of relations, and quickly after starting in the country, realized that UXO was an issue that needed to be addressed. So we not only began to form those bonds of trust and reconciliation between people, but also to address the ordinance in the ground. By leading humanitarian demining initiatives in Vietnam, PeaceTrees demonstrates dependable, pragmatic cooperation with economic and defense allies. Continued U.S. support signals our commitment in shared security interests and to partnerships that produce tangible outcomes. We also advance American citizens' interests while advancing national diplomatic interests. Our people-to-people citizen diplomacy programs bring veterans, school-star families, and youth to tour Vietnam on a yearly basis. We run 2 to 3 to 4 programs a year in collaboration with universities and our own programs to see our mine action work in progress, to visit embassies in Vietnam, and to learn about American diplomacy in action. Travelers also learn about the U.S.-Vietnam War and have opportunities to visit areas where they or their family members have served. Through this work, PeaceTrees also supports veterans and their families in honoring their history and service, while advancing a positive U.S. presence abroad that aligns with U.S. national interests. Finally, we also advance American business and economic interests by making land in central Vietnam safe for productive use. Through explosive risk education and clearance partnerships, we help ensure that farmland, infrastructure, borders, and development sites can be used safely by communities, local governments, and private industry. We've also earned the support of American businesses in this effort. So, for example, for the past 5 years, we partnered with Boeing to deliver mine risk education to communities in central Vietnam to over 220,000 people, with support from the U.S. Department of State and American civic partners such as Rotary. This work directly supports conditions necessary for economic activity by reducing risks to workers, farmers, and transportation networks. The government of Vietnam has been clear that addressing war legacy issues is central to the U.S.-Vietnam Comprehensive Strategic Partnership because it enables both the broader defense and the economic cooperation that both countries seek. By helping make land safe and usable, PeaceTrees' work helps create the conditions for trade, investment, infrastructure development, and private sector engagement, priorities shared across both the public and private sectors in the United States. So I do want to leave you with a recent example of our work that underscores the excellence and the pride with which American organizations complete conventional weapons destruction every day, and the everyday impact that mine action has on local communities. Late last year, heavy rains triggered a landslide in central Vietnam in one of our main provinces that we work in, Quang Tri province. The landslide was on a road near a kindergarten that we ourselves have built, and the ground shifted, exposing 115 pieces of ordnance. The pieces of ordnance ranged from small munitions, rockets, projectiles, and it was found by a local farmer. He called it in to our hotline, and our deminers responded very shortly. They secured the area and were able to safely transport all the items to secure storage, and then later were able to take those items that day to a safe demolition site and dispose of the items, all of them. This entire process only took a few hours, a powerful example of preparedness, community collaboration, partnership, and American excellence. Such a swift response doesn't just demonstrate us removing a threat to the community, it protected children on the way to school, safeguarded livelihoods, and kept provincial roads open and safe. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much to Representative Houlahan and Representative Valadeo for being the leaders of this caucus, and to Chrissy for an introduction and organizing this event. Today, I'm going to say a few words that I think complement what my colleagues have already said. You've heard a lot about the examples around the world of the good that demining does I am going to say a few words about how the U.S. Conventional Weapons Destruction Program serves as a tool for advancing the administration's America First foreign policy as articulated in the National Security Strategy. My office is in the Bureau of Local Military Affairs, and we manage the Conventional Weapons Destruction Program, which supports a broad range of U.S. national security interests through security-related efforts. We are shifting responsibility to where it belongs, to recipient countries whose stability and sovereignty are directly at stake. This approach builds host government ownership, sustainable activity, sustainable security, and is not nation building. The CWD program supports security and stability through two lines of effort. First, demining, and second, weapons stockpile security. I'll talk first about demining. Our demining efforts include clearing landmines, unexploded ordnance, otherwise known as UXO, and improvised explosive devices that close land to economic activity, impede restoration of critical infrastructure, prevent the return of refugees, and are exploited by terrorists who harvest the explosives to make new bombs and weapons. Second, we have programs called weapons stockpile security programs. This assistance helps countries make their munitions stockpiles more secure, thereby preventing drug traffickers, terrorists, and criminals from stealing weapons and ammunition, including man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS, which you might be more familiar with as shoulder-fired missiles, and anti-tank guided missiles. This type of security assistance also helps to protect U.S. troops who are working side by side with countries around the world to make America safer. We know there are linkages between weapons trafficking and the movement of other illicit items. Our teams lead U.S. government efforts to prevent and interdict trafficking of advanced conventional weapons such as MANPADS and ATGMs that may threaten American warfighters and also civil aviation. This also supports the administration's larger focus on targeting non-state criminal actors. Our programs are designed to provide training and equipment with the goal of transferring the knowledge and capability to host nations so that they become self-reliant and don't need U.S. international assistance so much. In short, these CWD programs directly advance the America First agenda by promoting regional stability and economic prosperity by reducing the risks posed by explosive remnants of war. They reduce the likelihood of military threats, strengthening alliances through tangible support and burden sharing partners. Let me tell you a little bit about how the CWD programs advance the U.S. national security strategy. First, through strengthening alliances and burden sharing. U.S. funding for demining and weapons stockpile security programs allows the United States government to execute programs that directly advance our interests, both from force protection to facilitating direct U.S. investment. Our programs are not designed to last forever. Our assistance is designed to enable countries to take responsibility and ownership for addressing their own security needs and addressing threats existing within and passing through their borders. We also support the national security strategy by promoting regional stability and preventing conflict. Clearing landmines and weapons stockpile security programs reduce the risk of renewed violence, helping prevent conflicts that could endanger U.S. service members and other citizens, as well as threaten U.S. economic interests. And finally, in terms of economic security, demining enables economic growth and trade in partner countries, opening new markets for U.S. companies and reducing U.S. aid dependence. Let me share a few concrete examples of how we're doing this. The administration has been very clear. The United States must play an active role in securing our hemisphere. Reducing weapons trafficking through our programs supports larger efforts to stop the flow of illicit goods before they reach our southern border. Our weapons stockpile security programs support security forces in Central and South America, Mexico, North Central America, the Caribbean, Peru, Ecuador, and Paraguay to prevent diversion of weapons to non-state actors, including criminal gangs, narco-terrorists, and human trafficking organizations. For example, in 2025, U.S. funding trained 5 Peruvian military officers in ammunition management. These officers then trained the 83 soldiers in Peru's Army, Navy, and Air Force
in the best practices for managing weapons stockpiles. This effort helps Peru reduce its long-term reliance on U.S. security assistance. In a further example, my bureau's funding helped refurbish a munitions storage site managed by El Salvador's armed forces, working with our implementers to secure weapons that could have been stolen or diverted. The United States also funds demining operations in Colombia. U.S. funds support land clearance efforts, restore Colombian security forces' control of territories previously held by terrorists and narco-trafficking groups, and advance U.S. efforts to stop the illegal drug trade and destabilizing migration to the United States. In 2025, this support cleared all explosive remnants of war in the town of Turbo in Colombia, returning access to the land for safe and productive use, enabling new economic opportunities for local communities. And in Lebanon, our programs support ongoing efforts to disarm Hezbollah. Implementers are removing and destroying explosive hazards that Hezbollah uses to turn into rockets and other improvised weapons. Implementers also support the Lebanese armed forces' continued efforts to safely store and destroy seized Hezbollah weapons and ammunition. In Ukraine, our training provides training and equipment so that Ukraine can rapidly expand its own demining cadre and address massive landmine threats as the first step in economic recovery. Once Ukrainian government deminers are trained, the Ukrainian government pays the salaries and deployment costs of these personnel. Our short-term targeted assistance means that Ukraine now has more than 2,300 U.S. trained deminers working to protect civilians, restore farmland and infrastructure to productive use, and open safe access to critical mineral deposits. These programs stabilize Ukraine, further U.S. diplomatic efforts, and create investment opportunities for American agribusiness. As one example of how we are building sustainment into our demining programs, the Ukrainian government has agreed to take responsibility for future operating costs of the demining training school we established, and has already begun to pay utility costs for operation of the school. Landmines and unexploded munitions are often legacies of conflict that can reignite tensions or hinder peace processes. U.S. security assistance in clearing these hazards supports reducing the risk of renewed violence. In the East Asia Pacific region, PM supports the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accords which President Trump brokered between Cambodia and Thailand by providing timely support for demining and unexploded ordnance clearance in areas impacted by the recent conflict. This support helps pave the way for return to peace, prosperity, and stability across the region. We are also directly supporting the President's 20-point peace plan for Gaza by supporting the survey and clearance of unexploded ordnance, work that is a fundamental first step to enabling assistance delivery and economic development, as well as a critical way of denying Hamas access to explosive material. In Sri Lanka, U.S. funds identify, remove, and neutralize improvised explosive devices, unexploded ordnance, and landmines from contaminated areas throughout the north and northeastern districts of Sri Lanka. Demining in Sri Lanka secures U.S. influence and leadership in the Indo-Pacific region, where China is steadily expanding its reach. Demining opens new land to productive economic use to create a more economically viable partner capable of self-sufficiency, reducing Sri Lanka's reliance on other forms of foreign aid and making it more conducive to productive U.S. trade partnerships. Our implementers like MAG and HALO and PeaceTrees Vietnam proudly wear U.S. flags on their uniforms and display U.S. flags on their signboards, letting local communities clearly know that it's the American people who are altering their lives for the better. The U.S. Conventional Weapons Destruction Program represents some of the very best of American diplomacy, leveraging security assistance as a tool of statecraft by promoting American influence, building strong and capable partners, and enhancing economic opportunity and security around the world. This is just a small snapshot of our programs made possible through the valuable bipartisan support we receive from Congress and the U.S. taxpayers, which enhances U.S. national and economic security interests abroad.
Thank you for the opportunity to highlight this.
Thank you so much to all the panelists for speaking today. We do have a few minutes left for Q&A, and I'll also point out there's an open seat for anyone standing at the back that wants it. So we'll open it up for questions. Don't be shy. Yes, please.
First, I wanted to thank you all for coming to speak today. It was really interesting to hear how each of your organizations have tackled such a pressing issue that affects the whole community. My question was just, what has been the biggest challenge for each of your organizations in terms of tackling the demining process, and what steps have your organizations taken to kind of counteract that challenge?
Go first.
We'll start on your left and we'll go ahead.
Both of them.
Thank you for your question. So the biggest challenge for us has been the continuity of funding and stability. I mean, the model that we use in Halo and at MAG is, we're deploying and employing people at scale. And that's one of the things I really love about what we all do. It is about removing nasty things that go bang and hurt people, but it's also about employing people at scale, and that's dignified livelihoods to people in areas where there aren't many other stable incomes available. And I've seen myself in programs where people have no choice but to perhaps engage in the illicit economy, but then MAG comes along, Halo comes along and offers a structured livelihood, sick pay, training, and uniform. So making sure we can have that continuity of people at scale is the biggest challenge for us.
Yeah, I think it depends on where in the world you're talking about, and because I focused a little bit more on the Middle East, I think it's just the general instability of the region really prevents us from doing our work, and sort of doesn't need more of an explanation than that. But I think the funding is, we are so fortunate to have U.S. funding, and as Karen has mentioned and others, the Americans have led demining efforts globally for the last 30 years. And it's something we should all be proud of. But the challenge is so enormous that we could all use, the demining community could use, double or triple, quadruple the budget to really address the challenges in all of the countries that we work in. So if we could sort of wave a wand and get the appropriators to think on a larger scale, we could resolve contamination in large parts of the world if we just had more money.
Yeah, I think I won't echo what my colleagues have said because they're right on the money. Literally. But I think for PeaceTrees specifically, we are so unique in such a unique position because there's a challenge of both trust building and I guess burden sharing because of the history uniquely in Vietnam. There is a direct relationship to repair between the U.S. and Vietnam and trust to rebuild there. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the end of the war and 30-year anniversary of normalization of relations. And the Vietnam government sees it uniquely as the U.S.'s responsibility to clear the ordnance in the country. And because of that, they have committed resources to demining, but it's not to the scale of other countries. It's been primarily administrative and not operational. And so there's kind of this tension between how can we as an organization work with the government to, one, rebuild the trust between two countries while addressing the issue, but also how can we work with the government to take on that responsibility. And so PeaceTrees, and we work luckily with MAD as well in country, and the Region's People's Aid have been working really closely with the government on their next 20 years of strategy. So they have a national mine action plan. It expired last year, and we're working with them to format it for the next 20 years. And there's a lot of international conventions that they haven't signed on to, and so we're working to subtly tie in international norms to that, trying to provide oversight to maybe their government's mine action, systems that they wouldn't normally take on some of that whole burden, but we're trying to shift that over, so maybe they're not taking over the full operational scale, but they're taking on the data burden, they're taking on the administrative burden and slowly shifting that on. So it's been kind of a difficult time, and Vietnam, it's been very difficult as well because they're very adverse to using new technologies. So some of our colleagues like MAG and Halo use really great life-saving technologies that minimize human risk, and the Vietnam government until recently didn't even want to use drones. So that's also something we've been dealing with, but luckily we have 30 years of a relationship to build on. So.
And I would say from the U.S. government perspective, we're very fortunate that we've always had very strong bipartisan support from Congress for funding this work. And because of that, the United States has been the largest single financial contributor to conventional weapons destruction program forever, since these programs were started in 1993. I think the challenge that we have now is twofold. One is building sustainability into the programs so that host governments are not looking at us as the responsible entity, but are ready to take on some of this burden themselves. And then similarly, and I know this affects the worldwide organizations like Halo and MAG as well, getting other partner countries to also contribute more to demining. This cannot be the United States' problem solely. The scope of the problem is just immense. And just like Lucy was saying, we were talking about doing this work 1 or 2 square meters at a time, and there's millions upon millions of acres that need to be demined. So getting other governments to really step into their role as funders as well and support in a level similar to what the United States has done would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that question.
Thank you again, and echo the sentiments of y'all taking the time to come here and share a little bit more about your organization and department's work. My question was, you guys all kind of mentioned that your organizations and departments are hoping to not have long-term assistance for these countries. And I was wondering what reference points or metrics you guys use to know kind of when it's time to take a step back and let the countries really take on what you've imparted onto them. Good question.
I'm happy to comment on the Ukraine example. So one of the things that we've built into our program there from the very beginning as we designed the program was sustainability. So when you think about tackling a huge problem like a massive contamination in Ukraine, in the very beginning, then there was a ton of support through supplemental funding bills, where we're being given an extra $50 million to demine Ukraine. But we knew that would not last. So by setting it up as a training school to train Ukrainian government deminers, we're already building the local capacity at that level, and then also supplementing it with, just because of the immense needs, with funding for NGO teams to help fill in those gaps as well. But the idea was always that the NGOs would be phased out and that the Ukrainians would take leadership there. And then now what we've seen several years into it is they are becoming more and more capable, and so then we began talking to them about, okay, now you need to start assuming some of the costs there. I think another example would be in Angola, where the United States had been funding a huge number of demining teams there, but now the Angola government has also started to fund that as well. So they're just voluntarily picking up the tab and taking on responsibility there. So in each of the places where our partners are working, our implementers are focusing on using local labor for the demining work. So you may have an international staff that comes in, like someone in Lucy's position, but then the local labor force is going to be Angolan nationals or Vietnamese nationals. And so they're taking on the bulk of this work themselves to be able to carry that on in the future. And similarly with the weapons stockpile security programs that I mentioned, that is something where we are training local host nation security forces to do that work so that we would not have to be involved in there for the long term.
And I can start to talk about our work as well. As I mentioned on the panel, all of our staff in country are Vietnamese. Our leadership in country is Vietnamese as well. We have about 300 deminers and another 50 staff in country, so they're all local Vietnamese, and most of them are from the provinces we work in as well. And then we have a very small staff in the U.S. There's about 5 in our Seattle headquarters, and then there's just me in DC. So it's incredibly, localized. In terms of sustainability, I know I spoke to kind of the difficulties in burden sharing, but I think something in terms of long term is we've worked really closely with provincial government to put an end goal on what safe clearance looks like and what that level looks like on the ground and what that means for each province. So the province we started working in Quang Tri, we worked with the local government to say, okay, what does safe clearance look like? We understand that with shifting topographies and weather with typhoons, there's always going to be something where the land shifts and something's going to be buried underground and you're never necessarily going to know it's there. And so even in the future, there may be a few things that pop up. So safe clearance isn't going to be necessarily no unexploded ordnance, but we can get it as close as possible. So right now we have a goal in Quang Tri to be safe clearance level in 2035, with the assumption that funding and staffing levels remain the same. In the other provinces, there's not currently that level, but we're working to get a date on it for Quang Binh. And the other provinces, there's not a date for it because there hasn't been surveying in those provinces yet, but we're working with state to begin operations in a way, and other funders to possibly expand our operations as well. But we've also been working through the Mine Action Working Group in Hanoi to work with the government to get their staff trained by other governments in the area, because it's the government who really drives construction related demining for industrial areas. So one of the goals we've had in the past year is really to work with private sector partners to talk about what does long-term demining look like. We don't necessarily have the capabilities to do construction demining because of the depth. So we want to talk about with the government, in the future, who has the interest in clearing the land? That's private sector. There's a lot of American energy companies now, especially wind companies working in central Vietnam, who have a vested interest in clearing land. So working to partner with them and the military, who are the ones who clear construction level demining, to make it a more sustainable process, or making sure that those individuals on the government side are paired with, say, partners in Cambodia. The Cambodian Mine Action Commission, I believe, are the ones who are leaders, I would say, in the ASEAN region. So ensuring that they're the ones who are providing support for the Vietnamese officials.
Can I just add one more small bit to that as well? With regards to the metrics of getting the job done in the sector, we talk about all reasonable effort that's been exerted to make sure that the land is clear. So basically, it's an exercise of getting to that end state in the most safe but efficient way. And that's why technology is so exciting for what we do in this sector. And there is a lot of potential for partnerships with really pioneering American technology companies in terms of helping us to explore technology, be that detection, in terms of sensors or drones that can help us get to end state faster. I just wanted to add that.
Great. All right, well, I see that we're at time. I just want to thank everyone for coming today. Thank the USO Demining Caucus for hosting this event and for letting me pinch it as moderator today. The next UXO Demining Caucus event will be February 25th in the morning, and it will feature the Army Strategy for Low Intensity Conflict Demining Program, and they'll be here with some equipment. They may even be in this room potentially, or in this building, down the hall. So don't miss that, and invite will be coming around soon. But thank you very much. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us, and we hope that your bosses will also join the UXO Demining Caucus if they're not already on. So thank you so much, and grab some food on your way out.